Maybe we do a round of intros and kind of what's on your mind as related to AI and any concerns or questions that I might be able to answer. And then I can, once folks do that, I can kind of structure a little talk.
Sure, I can go ahead. So I work at a early stage startup, like Series A, or not even Series A, seed. And I'm the only product manager. We do like spend management for franchises with like a lot of locations. So
I'm sorry, you do what kind of management?
Spend management for franchises.
I can't parse what you're saying. When you say, it sounds like spud management, which sounds like you're managing somebody's potatoes, and I'm sure that's not what you're saying.
Spend.
Oh, spend.
Yes.
Spend. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's specifically for franchisees. So, it's like they'll have up over 10 locations and a central finance entity. And it's, how do you unify all of that? And then, which is really what we're focused on now, is like unification and reconciliation and getting that kind of like really strong data layer. So I'm kind of thinking about like, all right, well, with all this information, what would we maybe use AI to do? So we talk a lot about like, we maybe would want to use agentic AI to have like a financial analyst that you can chat with in the platform and figure out whatever you need to know about planning and forecasting. And then there's the other part of it, which is like, how do we use it to become more efficient? How could I use it for myself to become more efficient? Would I ever want like an agent for myself to work with? I don't know. So I think those are the two things, but I'm definitely more interested in like seeing what we could do with kind of our unique data set from working with restaurants to make it even more powerful.
Yeah, that makes sense. The kind of, yeah, got it. There's definitely a theme there that I can, or some threads I can pull on there. So that's cool. Thank you, Matt. Chris, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Chris Piggott, the CTO and director of product at a company called Epigraph. So we do 3D AR e-commerce visualization. So like, bringing products to life on the web for people to see and see it in their own spaces. AI in terms of our life, my life, it's at work. We're kind of keeping an eye on some of the model generation stuff. Obviously, we provide a platform for models to be distributed on retailers and our operated websites. So
just so I know what you're talking about, Chris. So there are large language models, which is an AI thing, but you're dealing in 3D and AR. So I think you mean 3D graphics models when you say model. Is that right?
No. I'm talking about literal 3D models. Sorry. Thank you for the.
Sure.
Yes,
Sure. So when you say model generation, you're talking about using models to generate models.
Yes, that's right. Two different models. Yes, exactly.
That's right.
So we're kind of keeping an eye on that. We're, the other part of our company does a lot of product visualization and rendering. So oftentimes using models to create what we say the last 1% of reality for some of these like really high quality renders that we do, things like that. Through my teams, we're working with AI agents in terms of trying to help with coding using we've been testing out Junie from JetBrains this week, see how that's going. And then in my personal life, I'm constantly fighting the struggle of trying to figure out a way to sort of do proof of work for AI and kind of diving really deep into that with some friends that work at Anthropic and stuff. So that'll be interesting once we've kind of come out of our own rabbit hole of discussions over the last few weeks and the upcoming weeks and see where that goes. So
cool.
Yeah.
BJ?
Yeah. I'm currently a product coach full-time. Background, my last role was a senior director of product in the e-commerce space. Prior to that, fintech. Done a couple of my own random projects as far as my product work, and then things that I've currently use AI on pretty much every day, utilizing it just like everybody else for a bunch of different uses. How to support my clients, how to summarize research or feedback, how to support and synthesize resources for clients when they're sharing challenges, how to point them to, identify those and point them to them. And then on my own, I've got a couple different kind of GPT wrapper projects that I'm doing on totally just passions areas for me. Really into board gaming. So I've got one that helps me identify different rules and different things that I'm alpha testing with some buddies. So yeah, lots of just fun projects, but mostly here just to learn and continue to expand.
Awesome. I've done some fun projects with AI in doing tabletop RPG style things.
Yeah, awesome.
So that board gaming thing resonates with me for sure.
Cool.
How about you, Max? You're running a business. What do you do? What are your AI concerns?
Totally. Yeah, I actually came with a few today. So, you all know me, I run Roadmap. And I have been obsessively looking into, literally since your last talk, Chris, basically how far you can take new product development or MVP development without a human in the loop. This has been sort of my absolute obsession. For example, I'll share an example of something that I just spun up with Lovable based on Matthew's non-existent Spud Manager company. But Lovable can now spin up this full UI of Spud Manager, which obviously doesn't exist, but helps you manage your potato inventory. And my question consistently has been, how far can you actually take that, right? Can that be SEO optimized and connected to a bank account and productized fully and sold, all without any human involvement? Or where are the limitations there? And then I do want to call. We had Alexa join a little bit late, but I want to make sure she has a chance to chime in, share her background and what she's thinking about in AI.
Yeah, I'm totally just kind of listening in. I'm starting a new role on Tuesday and just trying to learn how to use AI in my day-to-day, but also just like how to prototype and get ideas to something that's a little bit more usable faster. So yeah.
When you say prototype, are you talking about, building user experiences and graphical wireframes? Are you talking about working code, some combination of the two?
Definitely a combination. I'd love to be able to have something that I can put in front of a user to test, versus trying to do something that's going to go to production. Like I'm trying to just make the process of going from ideation to fruition faster, but without me actually trying to code the thing from start to finish. I just want to have something I can put in front of people.
This is rapid application development, but the A is really AI, right? Rapid AI application development. I got to think about that now. Great. Anyway, it's rad with AI. Got it. Cool. Great. So top of mind for me, just to throw some irons on the fire, is this has been a huge week for big vendors announcing AI things, right? Anthropic just released Claude 4, which is supposed to be really great, but also will call the police on you if you put stuff in there that worries them, whatever that definition means of worried. So that's a thing. Microsoft have their build conference this week where they're talking about obviously Azure and hosting your agents and blah blah blah. They're talking about swarms of agents, right? Which is very interesting because there's some research that says that AI does better if you give it smaller, more focused tasks, and then the idea is that you bring them together in chains, and the UX designer AI does a thing, and then the coder takes that UX and builds it, and then it's configured in a very different way, and so on and so forth, kind of in the exact same way that we specialize people today. So Microsoft says that your future job will be managing swarms of agents, which I think is pretty plausible. I know coders that have turned from ICs into managers of AI agents already. So this is some pretty cool stuff that Microsoft's talking about. I myself was in Mountain View at Google I/O, and they have announced a bunch of consumer and developer AI features, all based around their Gemini 2.5 Pro and Flash models, which are top of the line when it comes to output quality and cost. They're really keeping those down as a way to kind of crawl their way out of the hole, right? I mean, Google invented Transformers, which is the core of generative AI, in 2017, shipped it as a research paper, and then didn't build products around it because it was the innovator's dilemma, right? They were worried that it would eat into ad revenue, and they were totally right. But by letting OpenAI break that nut, now they're getting the revenue, and Google is playing catch up, right? To bring all those features to Google Search, which they have done a bunch of, and that's looking pretty good. And that, spreading that to mobile clients in Chrome and the web, and on the consumer side, and there's a lot going on there when it comes to models that generate not just video, but video and dialogue and sound effects, which is blowing my mind, right? Also, top-notch image gen. They've come a long way in image gen. They released a new model this week, and actual UX designers, right? A whole tool focused on optimized UX design, which is pretty cool. That's all on the kind of consumer side. On the developer side, making these advanced features. Oh, and the other thing they do is you can turn on live mode where the AI can watch and listen to whatever you're seeing, from your phone or from your computer, and then you can talk to it while you're doing other things. Hey, what the hell am I seeing on this screen? Or where am I supposed to go next in this game? Or how do I set this setting or whatever, right? And it's kind of looking over your shoulder. Then on the developer side, making APIs and endpoints available for that, support that functionality is all pretty great. And then the other one that is really just a teaser, and I think it's just OpenAI that wanted to play in this big week, what everyone was trying to one-up themselves, is they announced in a very loose way something called I/O. And Max, if you're saying things, I'm not hearing them because you're muted, which is totally fine. I'm
just nodding with excitement because this was a big one.
Yeah, I mean, John Ive and Sam Altman did this little sitting in a bar saying nice things about each other in a very weird, kind of senseless way, talking about how much they love each other, and as a way to sort of build hype around this next-gen AI consumer product that is apparently, what comes after the phone. Who knows what form that will take, but of course, John Ive is the designer of the modern MacBook Pro, which in my opinion is the most perfect computer, and they will pry mine out of my cold dead hands, as well as the iPhone, which I like much less, but that's okay. I'm very curious, as I'm sure everyone is, because they said absolutely nothing about what they think a next generation, AI-powered device is. There's been a couple of folks that have taken a run at this, including my personal favorite, which was like a Star Trek badge that you keep pinned to your shirt. That was completely worthless, but interesting nevertheless. And a product called Rabbit, which was, again, a separate device. And I was constantly looking at that thing going, how is that not just an app that you just run on your phone? So I'm super curious what they're building. They have provided no information at all, but we're talking about it. So, they did something right. Kind of digging into what folks are doing. Matthew, you talked about, doing a very typical thing, which is I've got an app, I've got a bunch of data, I have provided a bunch of ways to access that data. And I assume when it comes to spend management, there's a bunch of charts and graphs that you've got, built in, and reports that you can generate that around that data, and people can customize those and download them, and, whatever they want to do with them. But you're constantly, inundated with this feature for, oh, I want this report, I want that report, I'm going to be able to answer this question or that question. How do I, get the information I want out of my data in the way that suits me best? And the long tail on that is impossible to ever get to the end of. And so that's why putting some AI chat that's trained on the user's specific data as their context is a perfect solution to that problem, because you give it tools that allows it to, access the user's data and draw charts and graphs, and, provide tailored UI experiences in a chat that allows them to change this setting or that setting, or, whatever it is in your app. And that gives them the ability to, on the fly, describe the feature they wish they had to the AI, and it can just produce it for them on the fly, right? Oh, you want a chart that gives this data versus that data? Well, that's not a built-in feature, but that's okay. I'll pull that data in for you. I'll show the chart, etc. Right? So that is a very common thing to want to do. And it's a wonderful way to kind of deal with that long tail of features that you'll never be able to implement. And if you did, the UX would be so confusing that nobody could figure out how to use it. But still let people get to their data and get that kind of interaction they want. But there is a downside. Of course, you knew there was a downside, right? It can't be just all, puppies and rainbows. The downside is, how do you build the AI in such a way that the user can actually trust the output? And of course, it is inherent with AI that you have hallucination. And so, as one example, I'm kind of an amateur financial planner, and so I managed all my own finances. And it was when it came time to decide about retiring last year. What does that mean? How does that look? What does that look like for me? How does the cash flow look? How does the financial outlook? And there's all kinds of tools on the internet that do that, and some of them are good and easy to use, and some are good and hard to use. And you plug your numbers in, and you run your scenarios, and you try these things, and all of it is based around algorithms and chats, algorithms and charts and things that human developers have built, and you trust them. You trust that they've got the math right. You trust that they've tested the math. You trust that they are representing the data properly. But when an AI, given the same data, is starting spitting out numbers and charts at me, I don't trust it. Anything it would give me, I would double check. And especially when it starts, losing track, right? You say, what if this number and that number, and then it starts answering your questions, and you start interacting with it, and suddenly your base numbers start changing and its results, and you're like, no, that wasn't the number I meant. I said blah, blah, blah. And then you start swearing at it, and, all trust is blown, right? And so that becomes the hard thing, not providing the data and the tools and the interactivity. That's relatively easy. It's how do you deal with and how do you minimize the hallucinations? That's really the hard part. And I don't know if you've gotten to that part in your business yet, Matthew, but if you haven't, I will I'll ask you to keep an eye on that, right? Because when it comes to this hard number stuff, people really need to be able to trust the results.
Chris,
Yeah.
I think it was you last time who mentioned emerging systems for like self-audited confidence score systems, right? Where you basically would run those outputs 10 times, have AI have that same model take the average of confidence scores across those outputs, and so long as it's above some certain threshold, you have like essentially a 99.9999% chance that it'll in fact not be hallucinating. Would that would that apply here?
So there are a number of things that this is still an open research problem, by the way. This is not a solved problem. There are a number of ways to be able to tackle this. One is running the model a few times with the same input and checking its output to see if it's the same. One is engaging other models. One is engaging thinking mode, and being able to run a slider about how hard and how long the LLM thinks. One is prompt engineering, right? Giving it its own tools for checking its output and making sure it's saying things that are sane and useful. But there's always the trade-off, which is, in general, the longer an LLM thinks about something, the more likely it is to be right. But of course, that takes longer, and it costs you, the vendor, providing this feature, calling into the AI and asking it to think hard, more money, right? And how do you recoup that expense, and where do you draw that line, right? So there's trade-offs here, and like I say, it is not a solved problem. Moving on. Any questions, Matthew? Any questions about that? Any follow-up thoughts?
It's really helpful. It's super true that when it comes to finances, you can lose trust extremely quickly, which I think is why, like financial institutions probably be slower to take up a lot of this stuff, especially when dealing with huge numbers. You literally can't make a mistake. I guess I'm starting to think about like just the level of accuracy based on what they're asking about, and if there's like an implementation where you could kind of be like, if you could start segmenting out questions where it's like, if this is touching upon stuff that's too sensitive, maybe we're not at a point where we should answer it. But if there's things that are less sensitive, maybe that would make, like, then let the AI go. So I was kind of thinking about that, where it's like, if I don't want to not release something because we're so nervous about being wrong about certain types of questions that can come up, while there can still be a lot of things where we could be helpful, but still protecting like trust and being, like a good source for information.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of user experience design work you can do to help with that trust issue as well, right? One thing you can do is to, as you say, if the data is too important or sensitive, or the numbers are too big or whatever, the AI can just bail and say, I make mistakes sometimes. I'm not willing to make mistakes, when it comes to that thing you just asked. In my experience, when the AI does this, that just pisses me off. Right? Now, of course, I'd rather be angry than given a confident wrong answer, right? That would make me even more angry. But I don't know if it's the best way to, because in either case, it trains me not to ask those kinds of questions, in which case you're not getting the benefit of that feature, right?
Matt, something we talked about in an earlier, like literally an hour ago, was preambles, giving your GPT or your LLM things that it shouldn't touch, or subjects that it may only speak about, and ways to talk about these things too. It's pretty good about it.
In the field, we call this the system prompt or the system instructions, but it's essentially the and this can go on for pages and pages, right? I mean, you can give these AIs a great deal of instruction, but the just because you tell it to do something doesn't mean it's going to, and just because you tell it not to do something doesn't mean it's going to. I have done prompt engineering where I've been like, hey, I've already told you 5 times and you keep doing it anyway. Let me update the system instruction and tell you a 6th time, and suddenly that's enough to make it work. That does not make me confident as somebody writing these system instructions as a way to think, oh, great, that 6 times the charm. That's really, I can really trust what the LLM's going to do. In those cases, I tend to think about how I can restructure things, break them down into smaller pieces where I can have more focused or confident answers, and then kind of build a pipeline of agents. And in fact, you can have agents that build pipelines of agents, right? You can have an LLM that says, okay, let me look at what the user's trying to do. Now let me string together a set of agents, and let me break that down into steps. And then we'll ask this agent. And again, this is an unsolved problem, but it's definitely something you have to worry about, especially when you think about, financial data. And I will tell you that as much as I want to talk to an AI agent in the financial services apps that I personally use, I have not seen any of them add one. And I'm sure this is the reason why. Yeah. Now, Chris, when it comes to generating models from models, I have to imagine that you are generating 3D models using some textual representation, because just as an LLM can, it's a large language model, right? So the thing it excels at is generating strings of text, predictive strings of text, right? And so I'm curious, what format do you use that you find works the best when it comes to generating models?
Yeah, it's generally, it's not LLMs, these are oftentimes machine learning algorithms that are created to, people call them AI, but there's a lot of work being done by Google, Facebook, Meta, that are using these things that are generally taking 2D images, right, and then transforming them into 3D objects.
That is a very different technology. You're absolutely correct, right? It's still neural network based, right? But it's not transformers. It's not, let me ingest the internet and then you definitely can, and people are, including Meta, using LLMs to generate 3D models. They're using it as a way to think about the metaverse, which is, hey, the metaverse has to have all of this 3D content. The users can't create it all. It'll take forever. But if you can have an AI do it. And of course, there's also generative AI models that are actually being trained on various kinds of, first-person shooters style games, and being asked to create a game on the fly that actually generates frame by frame based on user input, right? As you move around or shoot or whatever, pick things up. That blows my mind, right? They actually have a version of Doom that is generated frame by frame by an LLM as opposed to being driven by the underlying Doom engine. That is craziness as far as I'm concerned. So, I don't have any idea where this 3D model stuff, generation stuff is going to go, but wow, the things that people are already doing just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's what's really cool about it is, generally speaking, getting to a somewhat realistic, or product in a 3D space for the web now is pretty good. But what people are doing then is using this on top of using things like Google is using VO, right, to then use its light interaction and texture mapping and things that it's gotten really good at in generating video, then generate the textures back out, right? So you're taking basically a 3D model or photos of an object, converting it into a video using AI, and then it's remapping those textures back onto the 3D model. That's really cool and interesting. So
yes, yeah, that is cool. Where I mean, that's the kind of thing where you're layering in the textures as input. Might as well provide them as output as well, right? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
right. Yeah, the link I just dropped is them talking about their latest findings. It's a short read, but it talks about their iterations through like neurons radiated. Excuse me.
So I'm curious. You also said that you spent some time with the JetBrains. JetBrains has their own LLM that they've been bringing in as a coding assistant into their IDEs, and they've got a dozen or so IDEs. I haven't used it. I'm not a big fan of JetBrains IDEs, so I haven't used it. What I use primarily for coding is the Cursor fork of Visual Studio Code. I'm super curious what your experience has been with using the JetBrains engine.
Yeah, I've been using, so JetBrains initially did a just like LLM, context aware like chat-based system, right? Where you can just highlight some code and ask an LLM. You can pick between the different models, right? And it gives it context with the prompt, basically. Junie is their newest release, which has been really nice because it's very integrated into the IDE. I started my development on Android and eventually Android Studio, so just kind of built a liking to JetBrains, right? That's where I came from.
Sure. Yeah, there's two kinds of people, right?
Yeah, as much as I loved my Visual Studio back in the day when I was doing C#. But,
Sure.
yeah, it's very nice. It interacts with all of the tools that you're just using day to day. It's agent based, so I can just send it off to go do a task that I'm just like, look, I need to change the structure of 7 different functions that are all kind of doing the same thing, but they're not. Like, I'll just let the AI go take care of it. It gives it to me in sort of like a commit format where I can say, yeah, I want to accept all of this or not. It's very much, it's sort of like Cursor. It's just, I'm so ingrained into the JetBrains IDE and all the shortcuts and everything that it's been nice to kind of give it a go this week and see how it goes. It's kind of just making those like remedial tasks that we do that are just kind of like boring and not that fun programming.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at this point, I've been programming since I was 14, and I love that, right? I love being able to write some text and affect the world, right? It's cool. But as you say, there's a lot of tedium, and if I could just, tell a artificial junior programmer to go and do this work for me so I don't have to, I for sure do. I remember people complaining about early versions of JetBrains and their integration, and then the quality of the code that came out. Sounds like they're continuing to integrate, and things are getting better.
Yeah, it's the initial one was more like, the IntelliSense prompting, like, hey, I think this might be what you want, but it was not good. And you got different results based on the model that you chose at the time. Like I find myself always ending up on Gemini or Cloud. So we'll see if they get 4.0 in there at some point, and I'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's very much more a like fully featured piece of the IDE now, as opposed to just being like slapped in place of your kind of classic IntelliSense that you're like, well, was that IntelliSense or was that the AI? Like, did I write good doc blocks or
right? No, I get it, and that's of course what the reason that Cursor forked Visual Studio Code is. It's very much easier to extend VS Code than it is to extend IntelliJ. I mean, by literally an order of magnitude easier.
Yep.
But the way they make it easier is it's also a lot less capable, right? There's a lot fewer things you can do. Whereas in IntelliJ and all of the JetBrains IDEs, you control every pixel, right? You can make it do exactly what you want. And so, yeah, for Cursor to be able to do what they wanted, they just needed to fork. But the result is pretty damn good, and I still haven't seen even Copilot do as well as Cursor inside of Visual Studio Code as Cursor does. So, okay, cool. BJ, I totally want to hear about your GPT wrapper projects. I don't know if you're available to talk, but I want to hear about the things you're doing with AI and board games.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I got a couple things going, but one that I've been playing around with is we do a lot of tabletop games. A lot of them are really complicated, and so whenever I'm usually the one that's staying up on the games, buying a new big complicated game. For those of you who don't play them, I'm not talking like Monopoly. I'm talking super complicated games where you're spending all evening playing the game. But usually I'm the one teaching people. So like I maybe play a solo game ahead of time. I learn the rules and I do that. But inevitably there's some rule somebody doesn't know or some challenge that comes up.
Sure.
I don't, I played the game once through, I've read the rules, but it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily an expert. And so what I've tried to do, basically I've got a GPT wrapper that essentially gives me the rules of a specific board game. The preamble or the pre-prompt instruction is essentially, I give it the title of the game, I give it some specific instructions on what kind of sources of truth it can reference. And then if it can't give me a specific page number or rule errata or something like that, then just abort. I don't want a bogus rule.
Right.
And so, then it can give me a rollback. I can insert a question and it'll give me a rollback. I would say, similar to the conversations on this thread, my overall confidence score is about 80%. Sometimes it just hallucinates and loses its mind, and the rule is completely, utterly made up and not applicable to the game at all, despite my guardrails. But I would say for me and, a couple buddies who already generally know, I can usually tell 99% of the time, and it's not a blocker. So, I mean, I've had fun fine tuning it. I've had fun adjusting the temperature to try to figure out like how aggressive I want it to be. And I've tried a couple different models and played around with it. But like I said, all in all, it's largely a passion project, but it's super fun and something that I've enjoyed. So that's one thing. And then one problem I'd love to actually solve with an agent is, as a coach, I have a ton of pre-generated materials, trainings, programs, guides, templates, all kinds of stuff. But I don't always immediately have that top of mind. But I'd like to continue to drive value in pre-created materials. So it would be awesome if I could essentially gather all of that, timestamp transcripts of the courses that I've made, and then when a question's presented, be able to present that. I know this is a use case that AI would be great at. I just haven't actually gone through the process of building out the MVP of this type of model in my own kind of personal, and totally open to some feedback if you guys have approach you'd recommend or tools to build that. But essentially, imagine it's a bunch of, a lot of them I've stored in like Google Meet recordings or Zoom recordings. I have transcripts available. It's just a matter of kind of parsing it, embedding, some keywords maybe, and then being able to resurface the material. So open to any input.
Yeah, the thing I would recommend for that springs immediately to mind is Notebook LM. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
So the nice thing about Notebook LM is you can give it pretty much anything as a source, a data source. And if you give it a prompt, it can even go and discover sources if you want to. And then you have control over, these are the sources allowed, nope, don't want that one. Oh, yes, I want these. And then what you can do a number of things. You can do crazy stuff like, take all that as a source and it will generate a conversational style, multi-artificial person podcast.
I've seen those examples.
Yeah, and that's fun for sure, right? I mean, it gets old pretty quick because it's pretty formulaic. But the thing that I find is super useful is with all of the data source, and then you're allowed to let me just type something, and then that becomes part of the source, so you can add your own notes and things and your own data, and then you can just have a conversation with it, right?
And it's exclusively restricted to the source data? Is that how it works?
I don't know how exclusive it is. I'm just getting started with it now, but it is a tool that I found to be super useful. Or here's just a bunch of data, and I want to have a conversation with you about that data. I haven't noticed that it goes off the rails. I'll give you an example of how I was using it. So I had some ideas for a talk I'm writing. I'm like, let's find some data. And so we discovered some sources. And then I started adding my own notes, my own ideas and things that I want to use. And then I'm like, okay, now with that, all of that stuff in mind, let's start, blocking out, the story for a talk and, an arc and the beginning, middle, and end. And I found it a super useful way. And I had confidence, getting back to that, trust thing we were talking about, Matthew. I had confidence because it would actually, as part of the output, give me links back into my original data source
Awesome.
to where it got that information. So I would recommend using that. I think that would be a place for you to start for that kind of thing.
Fantastic. Love it.
Yeah. Max, you want to hire an AI to be your dev.
I want to hire AIs to do everything. I want to know how far I can get without a single person.
There are people doing that. There are definitely people building, their own AI agents and chaining them together and, building products and deploying products and shipping products and marketing products and they're doing stuff. I mean, people are absolutely doing that. And then security professionals will do penetration testing and just kill these apps because the people who are building them are like, it runs, it does what I want, let me ship it. And then, they're vulnerable to SQL injection and buffer overruns and all of these classic, because they didn't even know how to tell the AI to, hey, make sure you're not doing these things. These are bad things to do. And the AI is like, hey, it works. I read it in a hello world sample. Let me write it into your app and, we'll call it good. And so that is a common problem with those kinds of systems. So I will ask that you put a security expert AI agent in your stack to watch for those kinds of things.
Amazing. That's basically what I've been seeing, right? Is that the success in this kind of arena really comes down to the prompt. I've even seen it go so far as to actually call that prompt a PRD instead of a prompt, which I think is really cool. And sort of intuitive, but also, evokes all sorts of crazy future ideas. But
so that PRD idea is fantastic because when I was, a professional full-time PM, of course, my main job was to produce PRDs and hand them to the engineers, and we'd haggle, and then they'd be like, "Fine, let's do this." And then they'd go off and they'd do whatever they decided they wanted to do, and maybe they got some ideas that they liked from the PRD. But the PRD, as soon as the first line of code was written, was completely out of date. And so what I love is using Markdown and handing it as part of my code project. There is a prd.md file in my project right alongside the code. And then what I will do is I will work with the AI as I make changes and build up features and say, hey, would you update the PRD to match where we are currently? And then I can say things like, okay, the PRD matches the code. And I can look at it at that level and go, is that what I want? Is that still what I want? Is the PRD? And then I can go, oh, let me update the PRD. And then I can go back to the AI and say, update the code based on the current PRD. I can say, generate the tests based on the current PRD. You can say, generate the README based on the current PRD and the docs, right? That not only as a way to get things started and provide that initial set of requirements, but ongoing, keeping it as a living document. I found that is a wonderful thing to do.
Fascinating. I've like one quick kind of follow-up question to that, which is, have you found that as you have been iterating upon these sort of foundational PRDs or your original PRDs, do you find that subsequent prompts start at a sort of a higher bar? Because now your sort of template PRD is developed iteratively, right, to become this thing that you're talking about, where you've gone back and forth and you've continued updating it. Does that mean then that the next time that you set out on an activity to build something, that your starting point is actually better than it was the last time?
Oh yeah, I mean, so as you say, right? I mean, my prompts get bigger when I start new things, because when I start writing code, because the first thing I start writing with an AI is the PRD, right? So when I go, hey, I want an app that does blah blah blah, I'll say, let's start by writing the PRD. And then once I have the PRD, and I tend to do that in ChatGPT because that's my favorite tool for that kind of thing. Then I'll take the PRD, I'll drop it into a code project, and then I'll move over to Cursor and say, okay, read the PRD. Now let's implement that first feature.
And then are you finding that the next time you start program, I mean, this is sort of what I meant. Like, are you finding that the next time that you go out and build something, well, okay, I suppose the right question is, are you ever using previous PRDs in order to inform future PRDs? That's kind of at the core of my question.
Well, so what I found, the other thing that I really like about Chappity, I'm too lazy to say ChatGPT, I just say Chappity. The thing I like about Chappity is it's got enhanced memory. So every time I produce a PRD and I interact with it, I'm like, well, no, not quite. And then we go back and forth. Then it gets an updated memory in terms of what the last PRD we implemented was. And then I find, I don't know if this is true or not, but I find that the next time I do it, it's better at building a PRD that matches my own style.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. But I really love that. I love that PRDs, which is what I used to be, do professionally. Engineers were like so on. And now, right, they're checked right into the code and used to drive development. That just warms the cockles of my PM heart, right? That PRDs are now becoming such an important part of the process. Yeah, cool. And Alexa, I don't know if you learned anything today, if there's any questions you have. I mean, we did talk quite a bit about, prototyping and RAD and using AI for coding and that kind of thing. Do you have any questions or feedback, or was any of it useful for you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if anything, it's just a lot of gut checking. I think oddly enough, the biggest thing for me is just to remember how untrustworthy AI can be. Like it's so confident, and I kind of genuinely forget sometimes. So that's just a good general reminder. But I think the thing you were talking about as it relates to how you used your PRDs and like kept them updated, because I definitely struggled with the source of truth problem, which, like you said, the second you've written it and somebody starts doing something, it's immediately outdated. I think from an implementation standpoint, I guess my question was, why was the Markdown useful versus just having like the text of your general PRD? And really where I'm getting at with that is I was on a call where Cloudflare has just released, or in the past weeks has released a model context protocol that is useful via kind of any company, and a company, it was Asana, and they were showcasing how they created this agent to essentially go and update Asana boards based off of what has happened in meetings, which is really cool. But then my thought was just like, it felt almost even less complicated to just be like, hey, can you just update the PRD for these things, but like just have it in text. So can you maybe help me understand like why you needed to use Markdown versus just being like, plug into this text and tell me like update it?
So there's multiple click stops here. One is I just specify as much or as little as I want in that initial prompt, and the code becomes the source of truth. And then I can always walk up to the code and go, tell me what you did. Tell me what the state of the code is. Obviously I've done a bunch of that. And then the next click stop is let me, just take that initial prompt and add more details and put it into a full text file. And I just feel like I can be more effusive, more thorough, in a separate file than I did an update, upload to the code and go, hey, let's, build this. And then the next one is, well, if I'm writing text, I really want to be able to provide headers and subheaders and bullets and, et cetera. Not only because that helps me as I write it and organize my own thoughts and make sure I have the sections I want and the coverage I want, but I've also found that LLMs do better with, Markdown or some kind of way to organize things into top level and detail level just to drive its own behavior. So that's why I like Markdown, and that's kind of what a lot of people use. And all of those solutions are great because they don't require configuring a tool to do anything with MCP. And the reason I say that is because configuring MCP and getting an MCP server running and off and all of that gunk is nowhere near as easy as it needs to be, right? So there's a big, I can type into the prompt and then it's a little harder, but it's still very easy to just type into a text file and then, I'll use Markdown, right? And then there's this big cliff of configuring an MCP server and using it to talk with Asana or, some other, Google Docs or some other place of information. It's just a big cliff right now. Once you've got it configured, of course, it works great. And, that's the beauty of MCP is you can plug it into all these tools. That said, MCP is very much a quick and dirty protocol for making it work and is not in any way secure, right? So I would be surprised if your enterprise admins would even allow you to use MCP in a production environment. So that's the other barrier to entry. And we need some iterations on MCP itself to make it, one, much more user-friendly from configuration point of view, and two, secure and in an enterprise grade kind of way.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And I did not know the piece about the security either. So thanks for calling that out.
Yeah, that never makes it into the demos. Nobody says, oh, this is super insecure. Well, I think we're at time, Max. How are you thinking? How are you feeling?
Amazing. As always, I will. I owe you actually 2 videos, but I think this one even more effectively than the last one. We're going to have some really awesome little bite-sized content snippets out of this. So yeah, as always, thank you for sharing your brain with us, and thanks for coming, and I'll see you soon.
All right, talk to you later. Bye.